Montana Territory. August 1880. The sun was burning low over the edge of the Bitterroot Mountains when he spotted her barefoot, dust-streaked, and standing in the middle of the road like she had nowhere else to go. Truth Zane pulled his horse to a halt, boots hitting the dirt with a solid thud. He took off his hat, wiped the sweat from his brow, and looked at her plain. "You lost." She did not answer right away. Her dress hung off her like it used to fit someone else, her arms scraped and bruised, but her eyes clear and steady met his like she still had some kind of fight left. "I need work," she said, "or food." He looked her over again. She could not have been more than 22. "Name?" "Olivine," she said. "Olivine Booker." She was young but not a child, and she had the kind of weight in her voice that came from carrying more than her share of hardship. Truth rubbed at the back of his neck, glanced toward the distant outline of his ranch nestled in a bowl of dry hills and sage. "Most folks come looking for work bring a wagon, or shoes." "I had both," she said. Her voice cracked and she looked away quick. He did not ask more. He had seen that look before, folks who had lost more than they could explain. His jaw worked as he looked at her again, then said, "You can work for food, or be my wife." He said it flat, no grin, no joke. She stared at him, eyes wide. But instead of running or cursing him, she stepped forward, slow and sure, and took his hand without a word. And just like that, the rest of the summer changed. The Zane Ranch stretched across 300 acres of tough land, most of it unfriendly to anything but cattle, wind, and men too stubborn to leave. Truth had run it alone for nearly 5 years, ever since his father died and his brothers left for California. He had not planned on marrying, had not planned on much of anything, Truth told. But Olivine moved through his house like she had always belonged. She scrubbed the floors without complaint, cooked meals out of near nothing, and never once asked for more than what he gave. She said little that first week, but her eyes stayed sharp and her hands never stopped working. It was on the 7th day, just after dusk, that she finally spoke of why she came. "I had 2 children," she said, her voice low. "A boy and a girl, Naomi and Nalan. Their father left us in Lewistown. I tried to keep us fed, but there was not enough. A widow there took them, said she would raise them if I left." Truth had just set down his coffee. The way she looked then, shoulders tight, hands clenched in her lap, he could see the pain she had carried all the way to his doorstep. "I will get them back," she said. "Once I can afford to," he nodded. "We will," he said, quiet but sure. She blinked, looked over at him. "You mean that?" "I do," he said. "If we are married, then they are mine too." Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. Instead, she stood and walked over to him, resting one hand on his chest. It was the first time she touched him since that day on the road. His heart kicked hard under her palm. "I did not come here to fall in love," she said. "I did not ask you to," he said. "But I think maybe we are." She leaned up and kissed him. It was soft, like the brush of wind through cottonwood trees, but it held more weight than he had ever known. By the time September rolled in, they had married quiet, just the 2 of them and his ranch hand as witness. Truth built her a garden with his own hands, and she painted the front door blue because she said it made the house feel like home. They laughed more, ate together every night, slept close. One morning, she found him mending a fence post in the back pasture. She brought him water and a biscuit wrapped in cloth, then sat beside him on the ground. "I had not smiled in a long time," she said. "Until you." He looked at her, brushed a strand of hair off her cheek. "Same." That night, as they lay in bed, her hand found his under the quilt. Fingers curled together, tight as roots. In October, a letter came from Lewistown. The widow caring for the children had died. The sheriff needed someone to claim Naomi and Nalan. Olivine read the letter twice, heart pounding. Truth took her hand, steady as always. "We will go tomorrow," he said. They rode out before light, Trute driving the buckboard while Olivine sat beside him, her hands gripping her skirt to keep them from shaking when they arrived. The children were waiting on the steps of the small clapboard house, holding each other's hands. Naomi had Olivine's eyes, Nalin had her chin. Both stared at her like they remembered every inch. "Mama," Naomi whispered. Olivine dropped to her knees and pulled them close. "I am here now, I will never leave you again." Trute stood behind her silent. Nalin looked up at him, wary. "Who is he?" Olivine turned and reached for Trute's hand. "This is Trute. He is your father now." Trute nodded, eyes warm. "If you will have me." Neither child spoke, but Naomi came closer, resting her small hand in his. Nalin followed after a moment. Trute did not move, just let them come, his heart breaking wide open. By winter they were a family. Naomi helped Olivine bake. Nalin followed Trute everywhere, asking about cows and fences and stars in the sky. The house was louder now, full of laughter and tiny footsteps. One night after the children were asleep, Trute pulled Olivine onto the porch. The stars were out and the air smelled like pine and cold earth. "You changed everything," he said. She leaned into him. "So did you." He kissed her then, long and deep, hands wrapped around her waist like he never wanted to let go. She looked up at him, smiling through tears. "I love you." "I know," he said, voice thick. "I love you too," and she did not doubt it, not for a second. They had been strangers once, thrown together by hunger and chance. But now they were something else entirely. They were home. The wind had turned by late November, carrying with it the first thin scent of snow. Trute rose before the light, as he always did. But now he found a wool shawl folded over his coat, and tiny boots lined up beside his own by the door. Naomi had taken to waking early, just to sit with her mother while the coffee boiled. Nalin, slower to trust, watched from corners but had begun to follow Trute out to the barn without being asked. One morning, as frost slicked the window glass, Olivine pulled Naomi's hair into a braid while the girl chattered about the coyote tracks she'd seen behind the henhouse. Trute was mending a broken harness by the stove, eyes flicking toward them now and then, the quiet warmth of family settling into him like a sunrise he hadn't known he needed. "You ever think about schooling for her?" he asked, not looking up. Olivine tied off the braid. "Every day. But there's no teacher out this way." "There's a widow in town teaches from her parlor," he said. "Mrs. Elkins. She's near 70 but sharp, might be worth asking." Olivine's hand stilled on Naomi's shoulders. "Can we afford that?" Trute met her gaze. "We'll make do." She nodded, not with the gratitude of someone used to owing but with quiet resolve. "She'll go." That afternoon, Trute hitched the team to the wagon, wrapped Nalin in a quilt and took them all into town. The trip was long, the roads rutted with last month's rain frozen solid. Naomi pressed her face to the window the whole way, breath fogging the glass with every wide-eyed marvel at the passing fields. Mrs. Elkins agreed to take the girl 3 days a week in exchange for eggs and Olivine's help laundering linens. Olivine accepted before Trute could offer to pay coin, and he noticed the set of her jaw when she said it. She wasn't one to let others carry her weight. On the ride home, Olivine looked out toward the hills, her voice low. "I thought I'd come here to survive." Trute said nothing, waiting. "I didn't expect to want more than that." He reached across the seat, fingers brushing hers. "You think maybe it's all right to have more?" She didn't answer, but she didn't pull her hand away. The next Sunday, Trute rode out with Nalin to check the lower grazing line. The boy asked about everything: why the fence sloped, what cows ate in winter, whether the sky could ever fall. Trute answered what he could, and when he didn't know, he admitted it. Nalin seemed to like that better than any answer. By the time they got back, Olivine and Naomi had boiled apples down to sauce and laid out warm biscuits on the table. Trute noticed how the girl watched Nalan eat his share, eyes full of relief. She'd spent too many nights wondering if he'd have enough. Later that week, Olivine found a stack of worn books in the attic Trute's mother's, spine cracked and foxed with age. She read each one aloud by lamplight, her voice soft but steady. Naomi curled against her, Nalan listening from the floor. Trute sat nearby, his hand resting against Olivine's ankle beneath the hem of her dress, unnoticed but grounding them both. One night, after the children had been put to bed, Olivine lingered by the hearth. Trute was oiling the hinges on the back kitchen door, his shirt sleeves rolled past the elbow, forearms streaked with dust and grease. "You ever wish for something before you had it?" she asked. He set down the rag. "Not sure I understood how." She moved toward him then, hands at his waist, her eyes searching his face. "I used to think I'd never want a man again, thought I was safer without." He nodded, letting her find the words. "But I look at you and I don't feel afraid." He drew her close, one hand at the small of her back. "You never have to be." When he kissed her, it wasn't rushed. It was slow and sure, like everything between them. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and something in her, years pent and locked away, finally eased. That winter, the snow came heavy and early. Fences vanished beneath white drifts, days shrank to a few hours of gray light. But the house held steady. Trute taught Naomi how to read horse tracks, and Nalan learned to split kindling with a hatchet almost too big for him. Olivine sewed new mittens from old flannel, and her laughter started to rise more often, no longer something rare and fleeting. One night, the children asleep, Trute brought her a bundle wrapped in canvas, a ledger book, blank and waiting. "You always talk like someone who has things to say," he said. "Might be time to write some of it down." She opened the cover, touched the thick paper. "I wouldn't know where to start." He brushed a knuckle along her jaw. "Start with today, that's enough." She looked up at him, eyes shining just a little. "You always know the right thing to do." "I don't," he said. "But I know it with you." She leaned into him, and the fire crackled behind them as snow tapped against the windows. In that small, quiet room, the world outside could have fallen away, and neither would have noticed. They built something there, between the silence and the promise, between old wounds and new hope. And every morning when Trute rose before dawn, there she was, her breath soft beside his, her hand beneath his own, and the weight of her love anchoring him more deeply than any land ever could. By late January, the cold had settled deep into the ground. Even the cattle stood close together in the lower pasture, breath rising in clouds. The woodpile was down to its last 2 rows, and the creek behind the barn had frozen nearly solid. Olivine stood at the kitchen table, rolling out dough with steady hands. Naomi peeled potatoes nearby, humming under her breath, while Nalan sat cross-legged by the hearth, carving a stick into something he hadn't yet named. Trute came in with his hat dusted white, boots heavy with snow. He shut the door with care and took a slow breath, letting the warmth inside thaw the tension from his shoulders. "They're moving elk down through the west draw," he said, pulling off his gloves. "Means the wolves are likely close behind." Olivine paused, wiped her hands on a rag. "You think they'll come near the stock?" "They might if they're hungry enough. I'll set traps near the fence line come morning." Naomi looked up, eyes wide. "Will they hurt the cows?" "Not if we keep ahead of him," he said. "Things get lean for everything when the snow stays this long." Olivine set the dough aside to rise and cross to him. Her hands brushed the snow from his shoulders, then lingered a moment. "You need help setting traps?" He watched her face a moment before answering. "I could use another pair of sharp eyes." She nodded, and that was that. They rose early the next morning, leaving Naomi and Nalan with old Mrs. Tabor from the neighboring homestead, who had come over for coffee and stayed the night when the wind picked up. Olivine rode beside Trute, her scarf pulled up over her mouth, eyes fixed ahead. The west draw was quiet, the snow muffling every sound but the creak of saddle leather and the crack of ice under hoof. Trute dismounted first, tied his horse to a bare pinon, and began checking for signs. Olivine followed behind, her boots crunching through the crusted snow. He crouched beside a set of tracks, long and narrow. 2, maybe 3, not far off. She knelt beside him, studying the ground. They pass through often, only when they're desperate. She didn't speak for a while after that. They worked methodically, setting steel in the deeper shadows, baiting with scraps from last week's butchering. The cold bit through their gloves, but neither complained. When they stopped to rest, Trute poured coffee from the tin pot he'd packed, and they perched on a fallen log, steam rising between them. "You ever trap before?" he asked. "I used to snare rabbits back in Kansas," she said. "Not like this, though. We never had much land. Just enough for a few rows of corn and an old goat with a limp." He smiled, eyes creasing at the edges. "You miss it," she shook her head. "I miss who I used to be there, not the place." He passed her the cup. "You're stronger now," she met his gaze. "I am, because of here. Because of this." He didn't answer, just looked out across the snow-covered trees. But his hand found hers, warm in the cold, and squeezed. They rode home slow, the sky turning pale gold behind them. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Nalan waved from the window as they rode in. Inside, the house smelled of onions and ham, and Naomi had already set the table. That night, after the children were tucked in and the fire dimmed, Trute took down his father's rifle and began oiling the barrel. Olivine sat nearby, sewing patches into Nalan's pants. "You think we'll stay here forever?" she asked, not looking up. "I don't see why we wouldn't." She tied off the thread, then looked at him. "Would you ever want to leave? Try somewhere new?" He set the rifle aside and leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "I tried leaving once. After my brothers went west. Got as far as Idaho before I turned around. Why? Didn't feel like mine, this land. It holds me in ways I can't explain." She nodded slowly. "It's starting to hold me too." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers brushing against her palm. "Then we stay. And make it ours." The days stretched longer after that, little by little. The worst of the cold passed, and the snow began to soften. Naomi took to studying by the window, writing letters into a slate with her tongue between her teeth. Nalan helped Trute repair the grain shed, hammering nails with both hands and declaring each board good as new. One evening, Olivine stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the sun dip behind the far ridge. Trute came up beside her, silent for a while. "Spring's coming," he said. She nodded. "I want to plant peach trees along the south fence." He turned toward her. "Peaches," she smiled. "We had one when I was little. Never bore much fruit, but it bloomed pink every April. I think the children should see that." He studied her face, the way her hair caught the last light. "Then we'll plant them." She leaned against his side, and they stood like that as the light faded, the world quiet and waiting. In the stillness, she said, "I never knew peace could have weight." He wrapped his arm around her. "It does, and I'll carry it with you." Neither spoke after that. They didn't need to. Everything they'd built, the land, the children, the quiet trust between them, had taken root the way things do when tended with care. And just beyond the ridge, the first bird of spring called through the dusk. By early March, the earth had softened enough for Olivine to kneel in it. She pressed her fingers into the loosened soil along the southern edge of the property, where the land sloped just right for sun and drainage. Trute had cleared the brush days before, splitting the roots himself and stacking the cuttings in tidy piles. Now he stood a few yards off, watching as she set the first sapling down into its shallow bed. "You sure Peach'll take here?" he asked, brushing dirt from his palms. "I'm not," she said. "But if it does, it'll mean we did something right." He nodded once and came to crouch beside her, holding the second sapling steady while she tamped down the dirt around it. She didn't wear gloves. She said it made her feel closer to the work. Naomi stood nearby, her arms wrapped around a bundle of twine. "Mama, will they grow by my birthday?" Olivine looked up, squinting against the light. "They'll grow, but they won't bloom for at least a year. Patience, little one." Naomi considered that as she handed over the twine. "I can wait. I just want to see it happen." By the time the last tree was in, the sun had dropped low, casting long blue shadows across the field. Nolan had fallen asleep on the porch with a dog-eared almanac open across his chest. The boy had taken to reading maps lately, tracing rivers with one finger like he meant to follow them someday. Trute helped Olivine to her feet, brushing a curl of hair away from her temple. "You want to name him?" She tilted her head. "Trees don't need names." "Maybe not," he said. "But you might." She looked over the neat row, each one tied with hemp string to a post for support. "Naomi can name them. She'll remember." Later that week, word came from Fort Owen that a man had arrived inquiring after a woman and 2 children. The message came by way of a clerk who passed through on his route north. No name was given, only a description that sat heavy in Olivine's chest as Trute read it aloud. "Tall, pale-eyed, left hand twisted from a break," he said, lowering the paper. "That's him," she said, voice flat. "I thought he'd gone east. You think he'll come here?" "I think he already has." Trute folded the note once, then again. "You want to leave?" She shook her head. "I won't run anymore." He looked at her a long while, then said, "Then we'll be ready." That night, he moved the rifle from above the mantel to beneath their bed. Olivine didn't mention it, but she reached across the quilt and took his hand after the lamp was out, fingers laced tightly in his. The next morning, she waited until Naomi and Nolan were outside feeding the hens before opening the chest at the foot of the bed. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small pistol she hadn't touched since Lewistown. She checked it, then wrapped it again and tucked it into her coat. Trute didn't speak when he saw her slide it into her pocket. He just nodded once. 2 days later, the man arrived. He came up the road just past noon, his horse lathered and his coat dusty. Olivine saw him first through the kitchen window and felt her breath catch sharp in her throat. But when she stepped outside, her shoulders were squared. Trute was already coming from the barn, his walk slow and even. Naomi and Nolan stood by the fence, watching. The man dismounted, his left hand stiff at his side. His eyes flicked to the children, then to Olivine. "You look well." She didn't answer. He stepped forward, expression unreadable. "I came to take them back." Trute stepped between them. "No," the man's jaw twitched. "You her husband, I am." "You think that means something to me?" Olivine's voice was quiet but hard. "You left them. You don't get to come back and say what happens now. I didn't give you permission to take them. They weren't yours to begin with," she said. "You only ever claimed what you could use." He looked at her, then past her at the children. "They're mine." Trute didn't move. "They're not." The man reached for his coat, but Trute had already drawn his rifle. It wasn't pointed, but it was ready. Olivine stepped forward then, standing between both men. She pulled the pistol from her coat and held it at her side, loose but steady. "I won't let you take them," she said. He stared at her, then looked again at the rifle. The silence stretched, brittle as glass. Finally, he turned back to his horse. "This ain't done." "It is," she said. "You just don't know it yet." He rode off without another word. That night, Olivine lit a fire in the yard and dropped the oilcloth bundle into the flames. The pistol hissed as it caught. Trute stood beside her, arms crossed, saying nothing. When it was gone, she turned to him. "I don't want to carry it anymore." "You won't have to," he said. She leaned against him, her head resting just below his collarbone. "I didn't think I could stand up to him." He wrapped both arms around her. "You didn't stand up to him. You stood taller." Inside, Naomi was teaching Nalan how to write his name in a straight line. The wind outside had softened and the trees by the pasture were still. Olivine tilted her head back, looking up at Trute. "You gave me back more than a home." He kissed her forehead. "You gave yourself back." Spring came slow, but it came. And everything that mattered stayed right where it belonged. April brought a softness to the land that hadn't been felt in years. The last of the snow melted into the fields, and the creek behind the barn began to move again, slow and silver. Naomi pressed seeds into the garden rows beside her mother, careful and deliberate, while Nalan walked the fences with Trute, carrying a small sack of nails and humming tunelessly to himself. With the threat behind them and winter finally broken, the house took on a quiet rhythm. Each day had its work mending, feeding, planting, and each night closed in with the warmth of steady voices and oil lamp glow. The children slept through the night without waking. Olivine began to sing again, not loudly, but often, under her breath as she stirred a pot or swept the kitchen. One morning, as the sun rose pale pink over the ridge, Olivine stood beside the peach trees. She touched one of the branches gently, where the buds had begun to swell at the tips. "They're going to bloom," she said. Trute was behind her, pulling on his gloves. "You knew they would." "I hoped," she said. "Hope's a different thing." He watched her a long moment. "You ever think on what comes next?" She looked down the slope where Naomi and Nalan were chasing each other through the grass, their laughter echoing. "I used to think about it like a cliff, something I'd fall off if I looked too far ahead. Now it feels more like a path." He stepped closer, resting one hand lightly on her back. "I was thinking about adding another section to the barn. Room for more stock come fall." She turned toward him, brushing a bit of hair from her cheek. "That mean you're staying put for good?" His mouth curved slow. "I think I already did." She leaned into him, the early breeze tugging at the hem of her dress. "Then I'll start sewing heavier blankets before the frost comes back." That night, they sat out on the porch after the children had gone to bed. The stars were thick above them, and the frogs had returned to the creek, their low calls rising like a song from the dark. Olivine rested her feet in Trute's lap, eyes half closed. "I don't think I ever knew what stillness felt like before now," she said. He ran his fingers along the arch of her foot, slow and absent. "It suits you." "I thought it would frighten me," she said. "Peace. I thought it would feel like waiting for something to go wrong. But it doesn't," she shook her head. "It feels like the thing I've been chasing without knowing its name." He looked out toward the fields, where the moonlight silvered the grass. "I want to build you a real parlor, with a window that faces east so you can watch the sun come up while you write." She sat up, surprised. "You remember that?" He met her eyes. "Every word." She didn't answer. She just took his face in her hands and kissed him, slow and complete, like she was sealing something in place that had been waiting too long. He pulled her into his lap, arms wrapped around her waist, and they stayed like that until the air grew too cold and the lamp inside flickered low. By mid-May, Olivine had begun writing stories in the evenings, Naomi curled beside her with fabric scraps and Nalan sketching animals on scrap parchment at the table. Trute carved a wooden frame for her writing board and hung it on the wall above her desk. He never said much about her stories, but he cleaned the lamp glass twice a week so she could see better and built her a stool to rest her feet on. One evening, Naomi pressed a folded paper into Olivine's hand. "It's your story," she said. "I drew it." Olivine unfolded it carefully, a drawing of a large house with the sun rising behind it, 2 children in the yard, and a woman holding a book beside a man with a hat. She even got your boots right, Trute said, peering over her shoulder. Olivine turned the paper in her hands, her throat tight. It's more than a story. It's the truth. That summer the peach trees bloomed. Not fully, not yet, but enough to cover the nearest with pale blossoms that fluttered in the wind like scattered lace. Naomi danced beneath them, laughing. Nalen held out a cupped hand to catch the petals. Olivine stood watching, her arm looped through Trute's. They'll bear fruit next year, she said. He nodded. We'll be here to taste it. In time, Trute added that second section to the barn. More cattle came. Naomi started reciting things she'd learned from Mrs. Elkins without being asked. Nalen built a birdhouse and hung it from the eaves. The house filled with the sound of pencils scratching, pots simmering, and boots thudding across the porch. And one afternoon, with the sky clear and the breeze warm, Olivine took Trute's hand and led him out to the trees. I want another child, she said. He didn't blink. Then we will, she smiled. I want it to be yours this time. From the start. He touched her cheek, thumb resting near the corner of her mouth. It always would have been. That night, as they lay tangled together beneath the open window, with the night air soft on their skin and the sound of the creek in the distance, she whispered, You gave me back everything I thought was lost. Trute brushed his lips along her shoulder. You gave it to yourself. I just held the door open. They fell asleep like that, her head on his chest, his arm around her waist, the scent of cottonwood drifting in from the trees. And when the wind changed again, bringing with it the promise of autumn instead of warning, they didn't fear it. Because the roots were deep now. The house was full. And love, once a fragile thing they hadn't dared name, had become a quiet, steady fire that would not go out.